Last month, this committee examined two far-reaching and consequential laws, the Endangered Species Act and the Marine Mammal Protection Act, both of which have been fundamentally transformed from their original purpose, scope, and intent through endless lawsuits and administrative agency actions, including guidance documents, rulemakings, and internal protocols. As I said during our hearing, this legislative body must do a better job of writing laws. It is Congress's responsibility to be clear, concise, specific, and unambiguous when defining the authorities granted to federal agencies. Today, we are considering 4 bills, of which 2 take direct aim at addressing and resolving the concerns that were raised last month regarding the ESA. Our first bill, the Pet and Livestock Protection Act of 2025, exposes the ESA failures, misinterpretations, and misapplications we have lived with for far too long. For decades, the federal government, states, tribes, and private conservation partners have worked to recover the gray wolf populations, and they have been highly successful in doing so. Despite this achievement, however, the Fish and Wildlife Service's recognition that our gray wolf populations have not only recovered, but thrived under both Republican and Democrat administrations have been met with controversy. The endless litigation surrounding the delisting of a recovered species like the gray wolf only proves the point that the ESA must be reformed. We must find a way to end this doom loop of recovery, delisting, litigation, court intervention, relisting, the wasting of more resources on a recovered species, another attempt at delisting, and then starting it all over again. Which brings me to our second bill, ESA Amendments Act of 2025, sponsored by Chairman Westerman. This bill makes critical changes to the ESA to provide regulatory certainty, transparency, and accountability. This is done through the inclusion of definitions and parameters of previously ambiguous terms and requiring the service to implement incremental and objective recovery goals for listed species that are coupled with tangible regulatory relief as such goals are accomplished. I want to thank Chairman Westerman for once again leading the effort to reform the ESA and start us on a course of sound resource and species management. This legislation is a serious step towards a model of endangered species conservation that empowers local landowners and decision makers. We are also considering legislation sponsored by Congresswoman Green, the Gulf of America Act of 2025, which aims to codify part of President Trump's Executive Order 14172, restoring names that honor American greatness. The bill also ensures consistency in our statutes, maps, and regulations by updating any reference by reflecting uniformity with any reference to the Gulf. Lastly, we are considering the Great Lakes Mass Marking Program of 2025, sponsored by Congresswoman Dingell. This bill would expand the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service's mass marking program for fisheries management in the Great Lakes. The Great Lakes provide incredible economic value for the Midwest and are a treasured natural resource. Unfortunately, the minority chose not to invite a witness to talk about the importance of this legislation. With that, I want to take the time to thank our witnesses for being here today, and I look forward to a robust conversation. Dr. Roberts, how has the threat of litigation impacted a federal agency's decision to delist a species?
Thank you for the question, Chair. I believe that the threat of litigation creates fear in agencies and moving forward with delisting decisions. I think it unnecessarily delays those decisions. Lawyers like to be in court, biologists don't want to be in court. And so I believe that it slows down that process, unfortunately.
Well, how would prohibiting judicial review within the post-delisting 5-year monitoring period help with science-based decisions?
Thank you. I believe that would help because in that 5-year delisting period, that's a required monitoring period. For most of these issues, or all of these issues, we're very concerned about the long-term trajectory in populations, not a change 1 year to the next. So we're interested in how a trajectory is changing, and it takes time to see that. And so that 5-year period, I believe, is appropriate, the 5-year monitoring period. Removing it from judicial review allows those situations to play out. I think it's important to note that the minimum population goals that are established by Fish and Wildlife Service enabling delisting are set sufficiently high that they can be resilient to some unforeseen circumstances, thus limiting the need to respond through litigation.
Well, that resiliency has been shown with both the gray wolf population and the grizzly bear population in Wyoming. I think both of those species are an example of how state management actually works to protect a recovered wolf or a recovered population, and shows the resiliency that you're talking about. Isn't that correct?
Yes, I would say so. There may be some debate about the particular methods that are used in those states, but we need to remember the Endangered Species Act is focused on preventing an animal from going extinct. That is the purview of the Endangered Species Act, and it is clear that wolves and grizzly bears are not in danger of extinction in the Northern Rocky Mountains.
Mr. Guardado, the issues you have raised today are a perfect example of how local agency bureaucrats are able to place mandates on the operations of infrastructure that has billions of dollars in direct and indirect economic impacts with little or no approval from political appointees or Congress. How does providing a clear and consistent definitions for terms such as environmental baseline create more certainty for the communities you serve and limit the discretion of agency bureaucrats?
Well, thank you. Well, as a result, related to the environmental baseline, in our particular case, we have a Freeman diversion. And rather than just separating out the status of the species and using that as the baseline and the existing operations, a compilation of that baseline along with future operations and a future project are tacked on, which make it virtually impossible in its current state to achieve any type of requirements. Right now at the Freeman diversion, we have a situation where the National Marine Fisheries Service has a preferred legacy project of their own, which is a price tag of about $250 million, which imagine a concrete platform the size of a football field in the middle of a river wiping out existing ecosystem when we have another alternative that's about $20 million that meets all of the design criteria, all of the species criteria to ensure that it's not only protected, but it has a viable recovery state. So these are clear examples where the amendments here in this ESA, it's not to dissolve the ESA, it's to improve it, to provide clarity so that we can actually move projects forward and save the taxpayers a lot of money.
I think one mistake that people make is that when a species is delisted or downlisted, there is continuing management and monitoring. In fact, one of the factors for delisting is that there must be an adequate regulatory mechanism in place to protect that species into the long term. So when the gray wolf in Wyoming, for example, was delisted, the state of Wyoming has taken over the monitoring and the management and been able to protect a recovered population for literally decades at this point. So I appreciate your comments and your testimony and the insight that you bring. I now will call on Ms. Hoyle for her 5 minutes of questioning.